Of Anthony and Ari Unfiltered, a weekly radio show with former Congressman Anthony Esposito and Inspector General, Department of Labor, in conversation with Assemblyman Ari Brown on the hot button issues of the day. Here now are your hosts. Take it away.
Thanks, Ev. I'm actually here. And first, Shana Tova to you and all of our listeners here on WNEW 102.7 FM and WSNR 620 AM. My partner, Anthony, is out saving the world, so I'm on my own today. I hope I'm good looking enough to be on film, and I hope I sound as eloquent as my partner typically does. A lot of things happening today, but they all focus around the same issue, the chaos that the Democrats are putting on society and the world. We've had today left-wing violence against law enforcement again. A 29-year-old radical opened fire on ICE agents, leaving a casing labeled anti-ICE. This is exactly what Tom Homan said would happen a couple of years ago. And, he's been on the job since 1985, and he's exactly right. Someone was killed, one of the people who were detained there, but it doesn't matter who was killed. It's unnecessary when you have Democrats radicalizing the young today, calling Republicans and conservatives Nazis. This is what it leads to. It leads to the shooting of our great president, who thank God survived, President Trump, and the unfortunate killing of hero Charlie Kirk, who just wanted to speak to people. But when they, you ever get into a conversation with somebody and they're losing, all of a sudden they get into name calling. And we've seen this throughout the Congress and Senate. They tell their constituents, get into their face. It's okay if you riot. You have to let out all your anger and aggression. I'm a little bit older than probably a lot of people listening on the station. When I grew up, there were Democrats, there were Republicans. Yes, Tip O'Neill may not have may not agreed with everything President Reagan said, and President Reagan may not have agreed with everything he said. But there was a respect for the office of presidency, and certainly a respect for being an American. When my mother and grandmother came from Italy, they wanted to be Americans. My grandmother used to sit across the table from me with the newspaper right in front of her and used to say, what is the Times or the Post or whatever it was, what are they trying to say? She wanted to be part of the American fabric. My mother and grandmother wanted to learn English. To be an American, was so proud. The first time I voted behind a real curtain behind the voting machines, which I think are certainly a lot safer, I stepped out and I felt proud to be an American. It's very different today. The Democrats today are not the Democrats of old, the Hubert Humphreys and the John F. Kennedys or the Robert Kennedys. They would be Republicans today. I have a colleague, a former assemblyman who will name unnamed, a wonderful man, said, Ari, I'm a Republican today. My party has left me. So again, we see a 29-year-old radical opened fire, and this is what happens today. I seem to have lost power here today. So let's see if my new AI camera is going to follow me a little bit as I move around the studio, and maybe there we go, and maybe the lights will actually go back on in the studio. Okay, so where were we? Where does the blame lie? How much blame lies with the left-wing city leaders and politicians, like we just saw Kathy Hochul, governor of New York, endorsing Mandami? She says, well, I may not agree with everything. I may not agree with everything. Has she not paid attention to his voting record in the assembly for the radical ideas that he's proposing? And what about the anti-Semitism? I have a lot of Jewish listeners. Just finished Rosh Hashanah. We're in the Aseret Simei Tshuva, the 10 days before Yom Kippur, the days of atonement. And she's endorsing Mandami, who's not only calling for communist ideas, but standing with globalizing the Intifada. Sanctuary cities in our major cities are letting criminal aliens run free, and it puts Americans at risk. When will the left stop demonizing law enforcement and start protecting the public? It seems like if you look at whether it's a Democrat congressperson or a senator, they're always looking to defend the criminal first and the victim later. President Trump cleaned up Washington, D.C. The Republicans cleaned up Washington, D.C. alongside of him. Yes, Marion Bowser, the mayor of Washington, D.C., somewhat appreciated it and thanked the president for doing that. But we still have the mob in Chicago and other cities saying they are going to push back. President Trump, do what you did in Washington, D.C., clean up all of our American cities. Getting back to Mamdani, he said that should he be elected mayor of New York City, he will be arresting Bibi Netanyahu should he arrive in New York. Could you imagine something like this? I can. I see the radical left when I'm sitting in the assembly, the DSA, the Democrat Socialists. And you ask yourself, these are kids. These are 30-something-year-old kids. They're all a bunch of kids. But my Democrat colleagues, even my most liberal Democrat colleagues, live in fear of the DSA. Why? I say to myself, some of my colleagues are so liberal, and yet they live in fear because it's never liberal enough. They don't want just society to become socialism. They truly want to live the Communist Manifesto, and that's what this is all about. Let's switch gears for a moment, but it all kind of ties in to some degree. This kind of flew under the radar: justice system corruption and big city bias. Now, James Comey indictment, or hopefully indictment, maybe it's coming. Big city justice system corruption. Comey lied to Congress, yet big city justice systems controlled by the left-wing prosecutors protect political cronies instead of holding them accountable. This is why cities like New York are unsafe and law-abiding citizens are punished while radicals run free. You know, people always ask me, constituents and friends, my kids around the table, we always have this conversation. He said, okay, the Republicans always have all of these hearings, hearing after hearing after hearing, and things are brought to light. But I ask, and they ask, and I'd like to know the answer also. I'd like to see someone go to jail like we saw Roger Stone did. We saw heroes go to jail, and we never see the Democrats go to jail. The criminality of a Hillary Clinton and a Letitia James. Letitia James went after President Trump for the exact thing that she was caught doing. I hope this is seen through, and I hope justice is served. Only with setting an example of many of these criminals will society come back to normal. How does this all tie in? We talk about city and city politics. We have a real hero that, believe it or not, he looks like, I don't know, my age, but Curtis Sliwa. He's been defending New York for nearly 50 years. Doesn't get paid for doing it. Doesn't have a big bankroll. He's not, doesn't have to listen to any lobbyists or anything like that. He does it because he's a good American. Like the American today, Americans today are really good conservative people. Unfortunately, we have all of these outliers. Here we go again with the lights. My listeners, let's see if we can get the lights to go on again. Isn't that something? But anyway, I believe Americans are good conservative people. But we have cities like Los Angeles and Baltimore and Chicago or New York City, Dallas. It skews people's perception of reality. And then you compound that with having a biased media. It influences different generations in different ways. Us older generation understand reality. We remember the greatest generation, the men who had worked, who had gone to World War II and to the Korean War and fought because they wanted to defend democracy. The kids today with the smartphones and the iPads and all of these kind of things, they're weaned on it. Their head is never looking at anybody face to face. They're always looking inside the phone. And they really don't understand mannerisms and human nature. They're being trained robotically and hypnotically by this electronic media. So they see a guy who smiles ear to ear with that creepy smile, Donnie, and they see an older man like Curtis Lewa. You have a guy like Mandami promising free food and free housing, just like you see in, like was promised in the Soviet Union. And they think it's all good and they don't have to work. But where's that going to leave us? Will he be elected? I believe Curtis Lee was going to pull this thing off. Listen, he's the only Republican in the race, and I tell this story quite often. In the early 90s, my dad and I were building a orthodontic office, and we heard the stories of Yankel Rosenbaum being killed and the mayhem. He used to walk down 42nd Street, the X-rated parlors and prostitutes, murder and mayhem throughout New York City. And Giuliani came in. Who would have thought that would even be possible? And Mayor Giuliani cleaned up New York City. Yes, a lot of it has reverted back to where it was under the last Bill de Blasio and his cronies. But still, the city is so much better than it was under the Koch administration and prior administrations. Can it be brought back to that? Yes. To allow a hero like Curtis Lewa to take office. That leads to the next subject. And I don't have my colleague Anthony here with me on the Anthony and Ari Unfiltered show on WNEW 102.7 FM and WSNR 620 AM. But I could say things that I've said in the past that probably Anthony may be a little shy to say. I'm Jewish, I wear a yarmulke. I'm the first elected office holder on Long Island 7 years ago to wear a yarmulke in office on Long Island. And I'm the first and only Republican in state elected history to wear a yarmulke in office. That may sound nice, but it's actually very sad. How is it possible? I don't have Orthodox colleagues on my side of the aisle. I have some wonderful Orthodox colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Simcha Eichenstein, Kalman Yeager, Sam Berger, they're all nice fellows. But imagine the impact. Imagine the impact if they came to the Republican side of the aisle. That tremor would be heard loud and clear around the world. I know they say you have to be at the table to make a difference. No. Unfortunately, and these are not fools by any stretch of the imagination. These are well-thought, wonderful colleagues. However, they are called useful idiots by their colleagues. I've heard that time and time again. And yes, they can bring home some extra money to the table. But what does it really amount to if the city's in chaos? If the universities, if it's not safe for a Jewish student to be at a Queens College or a Columbia in New York, what good is it? Help get rid of the supermajority in the Senate and the Assembly. Come to our side of the aisle. Are you worried that your colleagues, that your constituents rather are not going to vote for you? They will vote for you. Not only they vote for you, you'll get a bigger turnout than ever before. People will feel emboldened and strengthened. Could we really change the dynamic in New York City like we see in Staten Island? Staten Island, for the most part, is somewhat conservative. Most of your colleagues in the Assembly, there we go again. It's like a mood thing here today. They just want to have this like mood lighting here. Most of our colleagues in the Assembly in Staten Island are conservative. Brooklyn can become that. Queens can become that. So I say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, especially those wearing a yarmulke, who studied Torah, Shmuley Berger, Simcha Eichenstein, Kalman Yeager, guys, come to my side of the aisle. Come to the Republican side. And there are other wonderful Jewish colleagues as well. I don't want to just, hone in on them. But when you wear a yarmulke, you know what? It's just different. you have a different obligation. You're making a statement that you're a proud Jew, and some of my other colleagues are proud Jews as well. I'm not saying not. But guys, how can you be in a party of the Ku Klux Klan? How can you be in a party of the segregationists? It's just so anti-Torah. It's anti-Christian values. It's anti-American values. You're the party of a Mandami. You're a party of a Kathy Hochul. You're a party of Rashida Tlaib. You're a party of AOC. Are you going to stick around when AOC throws Chuck Schumer out of office, and he deserves to be thrown out of office? When will you take a stand? You don't have a voice at the table. You do make a difference, it's true, but be a more powerful voice and become Republicans. And let's make this change once and for all. There's other things happening in the world, but again, all related. President Trump was recently asked, and he's asked often, about Palestinian statehood. We had the UN week, and I never understood the UN because they accomplished absolutely nothing, and we as Americans foot the bill for everything. They're always coming out against Israel. We saw so many countries like France and others who's saying that there should be a Palestinian state. This is an old discussion, as old as time. We can get into the history for a moment, but let's talk about today about Gaza. The Gazans, I don't like to call them Palestinians because, in fact, the Jewish people were known as the Palestinians. When the Romans conquered the second Beis Hamikdash, the second temple, they wanted to mock the Jewish people and called them Philistina. The Philistines were the arch enemies of the Jewish people. So they mocked them by naming the land Philistina, Palestinians. I have friends whose parents, who were born pre-1948, on their original passport, it says Palestinian. Where is this Palestine exactly that Macron wants to make a country? Where would that be? They have Transjordan. That's the home of the Palestinians. Besides the fact when you ask yourself, why is it that no Arab country ever would take in any Palestinians? Because whenever they arrive in those countries, it's just like the illegal immigrants we have here, but probably worse. There's chaos and mayhem that follows. Putting that aside, 2005, Israel handed over Gaza, and they have an opportunity to make their own state, finally. But what happened instead? Billions and billions and billions of dollars were received by the so-called Palestinians. And what did they do? Did they build cities? Did they, in short order, from 1948 to 20 years later, 1968, look how Israel had evolved as far as agriculture and commerce and to be a world power. They already fought the 67 war 20 years later and won. They built an air force and a powerful military. 2005 to 2025. What have the Gazans, the Palestinians, done? They built underground tunnels. They joined with Iran because Iran is the pride, Iran rules all terrorist groups. And they built chaos throughout the world. There was no development in Gaza. As President Trump had said many times, it's some of the most beautiful real estate in the world, and it should be developed. And they could be welcomed back. But for the world, once again, to say, well, Palestinian statehood, what group of people, after they were murdered and attacked the way the Jewish people were on October 7th, were ever questioned in this manner? The Uyghurs in China, murdered in concentration camps. Look what's going on in Somalia and Sudan. Has anybody spoken out about that? No, it's only the Jewish people. And for my non-Jewish listeners, and I'm sure people who are listening to the station, are good Christians. I'd like everybody to look at the map, try a world map, and try to find Israel on the map. It's the tiniest of tiniest specks. And you look at all the Arab worlds, all the Arab countries that surround Israel, Egypt and Syria, Lebanon, vast territories. But they have to take away this one piece of land that belongs to the Jewish people. In truth, people talk about being native to the land. The truth is, Israel and the Jewish people are native to one another. From the beginning of time, the Jewish people have always had a connection to the land, not just because the Bible says so. Ancient Roman texts and carvings point to the Jewish people. Wars historically in all different manuscripts have referenced the Jewish people in the land. Jesus was a Jew who lived in Israel. The Jewish people have always lived in the land. The formal recognized state in 1948 solidified that so that the Jewish people would have a place to go. Why am I harping on this? Because I started off the conversation talking about the radical left's agenda, calling Republicans and conservatives, President Trump, even Charlie Kirk, Nazis. A lot of the people who make this claim don't have the slightest idea what that's about. I sat across the table from my grandmother and mother growing up in my house in Franklin Square. And by the way, my backyard neighbor was Sean Hannity. Hearing the stories about aunts and uncles and cousins being killed under the heel of a boot, made into lampshades and soap. This is not some historical thing from hundreds of years ago. This is my immediate family. I don't have a single relative on my grandfather's side. Not one. Everyone wiped out. My mother and grandmother were in a famous boat and movie and book called Haven. It was a ship that was Roosevelt allowed to come to America. My mother and grandmother were interned in an internment camp in Oswego, New York, for 18 months. It's a very famous story about 1,000 Italians and other people. But they arrived and they appreciate that they were able to stay in America. Roosevelt died, Truman let them stay, and they appreciated the country for what it was. What's happened to our country today that it's become so radicalized? The hatred that swells amongst the youth today. I did see something, though. I'm Generation X, they say. That's after the baby boomers, post 1965 to 1980, I think it is. But I did see something about this newest of newest generations. I don't know what that's called, Generation Z, but they have become more conservative. And that's what Charlie Kirk was doing. Charlie Kirk was trying to engage that group, and he brought so many to vote for the conservative values that we all believed in. I miss my partner, Anthony D'Esposito, but he's out there speaking on behalf of all of us Americans, us Long Islanders, us New Yorkers, Jew and non-Jew alike. This has been the Anthony and Ari Unfiltered Show on WNEW 102.7 FM and WSNR 620 AM. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Great job. You say you did a good job.
I don't know.